Okay. Good evening, guys. I hope you all had a nice day today and happy weekend. Okay, let's move on to the objectives of today's chapter, which is psychosocial changes of early adulthood, middle adulthood, and old age. Objectives are that we are going to describe the development during the adult years in terms of stage versus contextual theories. We're going to explain the psychosocial changes during early adulthood, and we're going to explain the psychosocial changes during the middle adulthood, as well as the changes during old age. Now, before we go ahead into the chapter, what is psychosocial? Psychosocial refers to the intersection and interaction of social and cultural, as well as environmental influences on the mind and the behavior. Now, the development during this adult years. See, we all grow, right? So from the time we are born till the time we die, we are changing in every sort of way, be it emotional, mental, physical, psychological, social. We are ever we are going through evolution during our life itself, right? We're changing from one form to another and all. So the development, when we are growing, the physical growth of ours stabilizes during the age of when we start our adulthood. So at around the age of 25, most of our related, physical growth related things stop. We stabilize and we start looking towards more concrete roles. Our psychological growth is also stabilizing, but not to a complete extent. There are still some psychological changes that happens all throughout our life. Compatibilities and behavior, however, continue to change even as we grow older, right? That is psychological and emotional, as I said. Now, there are three sub stages or sub periods of adulthood. As we all know, it is early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. Now, early adulthood is the beginning of our the entire phase of adulthood. We are moving from our adolescent phase into the real world, that is adulthood, right? It is also known as the Grihastha Ashram period or the period of adulthood. It is where an individual enters their social life, they accept responsibilities, and they begin to take up their careers and start a family, raise children. It is all during this Grihastha Ashram phase. Middle adulthood is known for being the midlife crisis, or the is known for its midlife crisis. Now, it is during this time that an individual reevaluates, leading, they start questioning their long held beliefs and values. It leads to divorces, changes in job, then moving from, moving away from where they're living. Either they're going into a countryside or they're moving in from the countryside to the city side. Now, when I talk about changes in job, it is also about how what their passion is. If you see many 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds, what they do is this is the last phase of their working life, right? This is the last 20 years or 10 years of the working life. If they're not passionate about their job at that particular time, they tend to change the field itself. I have seen so many doctors leave their jobs, their comfortable jobs, and start becoming chefs, singers, artists, architects. They've started becoming painters and everything, and they've become very successful at it as well. Now, midlife begins in the early or mid 40s, and the crisis often occurs in response to a sense of morality, as middle adulthood tends to as people in the middle adulthood tend to realize that their youth is very limited, and that they have to achieve, and they have not yet achieved their goals. So what they understand is that their youth, that is their their feeling of youngness, has gone. They realize that there is more life ahead of sorry, behind them than ahead of them. Okay. At other people at this stage reframe their experiences by thinking of themselves as being in a prime of their life, and not to think about the period which or they don't think about the future years. They only think about themselves as being in the right time of their life. Late adulthood or the period of old age begins at the age of 60. Individuals at this point of time retire and start to worry about their physical and psychological health. Elders, people who are older, like if you see your grandparents and all that, when they're old, the first things that come to your mind when you see them is that they're not active, or they're not that intelligent at this point of time, or their intelligence is being lost slowly. They become very narrow minded, as in they think to a very certain limit or a certain vastness, right? They're not very open to new ideas. Suppose, say, the LGBTQ community and all that, they're against all this. They're being very narrow minded and all that. They attach significance to religion. So if anything comes across them, they'll be like, oh, ye apshagun tha. Yeah, this is very nice. ये बहुत अच्छी बात है. This is like, a God has given you a gift and all that. Different ways that they relate whatever happens in their life to religion. They tend to suffer emotionally, and they're emotionally insecure due to the loss of their close ones and their spouse. Okay, grandparents play a very important role though in everyone's lives, right? Because they help us find they help themselves. Sorry, the entire grandparent phase, at this point of time they start finding their emotional stability. They start to find their fulfillment, and they tend to derive self satisfaction when when their grandchildren achieve something, so they look at their achievement through their grandchildren's achievement. Now, when it comes to successful aging, it is when a person is able to develop many ways in which they minimize their losses. That is, the sense of loss is lessened and the sense of gain is maximized. So this is when they usually tend to turn towards services, social services perhaps, and philanthropy, right? Now we move on to the stage theory versus the contextual theory. You can move ahead, Ritika. Uh, Next page. Okay. What is a stage theory? Now, the stage theory suggests that all of human beings, every human being, no matter where and when, or where or when in their lives, move through this orderly progression of stages in their development, right? So, if you look at their entire life, you can split it into stages, as in the infant stage, the adolescent stage, the infant stage, the childhood stage, the adolescent stage, your early adulthood, middle adulthood, old age. All these are all stages in your life. Now, this person called Erik Erikson, no, he came up with 8 such stages in our life. It wasn't exactly with the phases like your Piaget's theory calls it, right? It has a more social context to it and an emotional context to what he is dealing when he was talking about these 8 stages of life. Development proceeds through a series of distinct stages, each defined by specific crises, which in turn result from the fact that as an individual grows older, they confront new combinations of physiological drives and societal demands. And biological drives also change, right? It reflects their biological drives reflects the expectations and the requirements of the society for people at different ages. Now, a person who is 70 years old, he can't be eating whatever he wants. That eating is again a biological drive, right? Again, he can't have a libido for a person who's almost 25 years old. These are all not what society looks at in a very proper way, right? Okay, there are three major crises that Erik Erikson describes. uh, I hope nobody's sleeping. I know it's a little long. Guys,
We are not.
all understood?
Yeah. Listening.
Okay, good. So, so three major crises. Sorry about that. Crises of integrity versus isolation is your first among your crises. It talks about the development, sorry, it must develop the ability, or the person must develop the ability to form deep and intimate relationships with another person. So an emotional attachment must be there. This entire crisis revolves around the capacity to love someone, to care deeply and consistently be with another person. If this is failed, I mean, if in this duration or in this particular situation, if the individual fails, they're generally moving towards isolation and away from intimacy or and a long lasting relationship. The second crisis that we're going to talk about is the crisis of generativity versus absorption. Now, if a person must let go of their egocentric, self-centered, and they have a need to let go of all this, or let go of selfish concerns and ideologies. Usually, at this point of time, a person takes interest in guiding and helping a next generation, including people apart from their families. That means they go into teaching positions, or they go into guiding positions, counseling positions, and stuff like that. If a person fails at this particular point of time, they generally cut off from important sources of growth and satisfaction. That means if this person is not able to move on by gaining sorry passing on the knowledge that he has, if he is not able to tell other people how his life went, and trying to tell them to learn from his mistakes, he generally doesn't get the satisfaction because he's not doing anything from some for someone else. If a person is still very selfish at this point of time, later on in their life they become very unsatisfied.
Can you
Okay.
please repeat that, Vasudha?
Sure. Crisis of generativity versus absorption. A person has a need to let go of egocentrism, self-centered and selfish concerns and ideologies. At this point of time, a person takes interest to guide and help the next generation, which also includes people who are not their family members, that is, apart from their family. If a person fails to do so, that is, fails to let go of their egocentric, self centered, selfish concerns, they are generally cut off, or they cut themselves off from important sources of growth and satisfaction. That means they lose satisfaction. Is it okay, Shrivali ji?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Okay. Can we move on to the third one? The third crisis is integrity versus despair. Now, individuals at this stage reflect on their lives, back into their lives, and try to analyze themselves. No, they want to see what if they've done wrong, what they've done right, and all that. If they have achieved purpose or meaning in their lives, they're very happy and they have a very big, huge sense of integrity. But in case their life is lacking purpose, meaning, or an aim or a direction, no, they tend to feel they have an intense feeling of despair. That is, like, as though they haven't achieved anything. Now, as per Eric Erickson, the person who's come up with this 8 stages of life theory, each individual goes through these three phases no matter what, or these three crises no matter what. The way in which the individual deals with each of these turning points determines the course of of the nature of the person's life to the from that point onwards. That means if this person is not able to successfully negotiate through these three major crises, it is going to be a problem for him. Now, before we go into the contextual aspect of the contextual approach of this particular unit, I would like to give you the 8 stages of development of a person's life, that is by Eric Erickson, because I see that all his 8 stages have been dispersed all throughout the chapter, and it is very confusing to keep a track of it. If possible, I would suggest you to take down this particular thing as notes. Otherwise, I'll reframe everything and I'll send it to you people. Okay, I would suggest you take it down as notes because it's important. All right. So before we go on to the contextual theory, this is not there in the textbook in a cohesive manner. I'm giving it to you from a different source. So the first stage of life is basic trust and mistrust. This is duration of okay. This particular phase happens during infancy to 2 years old. That is your sensory motor phase. This is when the person trusts another person. They're looking for safety and trust. The mother is where they get this from. So if the mother is very open and they're very loving towards the child, they form a trust and say bond of safety with the mother. And if this stage has been passed successfully, the rest of the stages become a little more easier. If not, then the rest of the stages are very difficult to pass through. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now, after this sensory motor phase, that is infancy to 2 years old, Ritika, we do not have this as such in our textbooks in a consolidated manner. I'm giving it to you from a different text.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is when you're past your sensory motor phase or your infancy to 2 years phase. This is from 2 years to 4 years of age. This is where this child a child is starting to discover their body as to what it does. I mean, they understand this is how, if I touch this, this is how I feel. If I do this, this is how it is. If I'm peeing, this is where it is coming from. If I'm going for potty, this is where it is coming from. These are all stuff that they're experiencing. They're trying to experience things around them and themselves as well. Okay, they're trying to see that it is okay to be me. This is the major thing. It is okay to be me if the parents allow. See, a very important point in this phase is that the parents play a very, very important role. If the parents allow the self discovery process to go on, that is the child to realize what he himself is or herself is, this child becomes very self confident, right? He's able to come out and tell everybody later on in life that, see, this is what I am, or and then he won't doubt himself as much. But if not, if the parents do not allow this phase of discovery, of self discovery, then the child generally turns to shame and self doubt. That means they keep doubting themselves. They feel that everything they do is wrong. They're ashamed of themselves. This is where your body image issues come in from. This is where if a person is not self confident, is not comfortable in their own skin, even at the age of 2 and 4, the what the body image issues that the magazines are bringing out, the social media is bringing out, will only worsen the situation when the child moves in from childhood to adolescence, and it gets worse from there on. Next, we move on to the phase of initiative versus guilt. This happens during your preschool age, that is from 4 to 5 years of age. Now, taking initiative in order to learn new things, try out new things, and learn basic principles is needed for everyone. Now,
Ritika,
this
can you
is the guys. Can you kindly mute yourself? Thank you. Doubting the degree of correctness. So the kids start doubting if what they do is correct or wrong. Okay, if this entire degree of correctness is encouraged, if they're able to see if what they're doing is right or wrong, if they're okay. I think Ritika stopped sharing the screen. Yeah, she started sharing it again. Okay. This doubting the self, the degree of correctness that they're having when they're talking about when they're doing a certain activity.
Vasudha,
Yeah,
sorry. Where do I need to go? I'm just.
a little above, little above. We're still in the
Right.
contextual theory
Oh, we are
versus
back
stage
on
theory.
contextual because you were saying something. So I.
Yeah, I said before we go on to the contextual theory, I want to give you the
Oh,
8 stages of this thing,
ठीक
because Eric
है,
Erikson is one of the most important persons during this entire chapter, as we're going to keep coming back to him again and again.
ठीक है, got it.
All right. So again, the degree, the doubtingness of your degree of correctness, if I'm right or wrong, if this particular quality is encouraged among the children, then they start pursuing their interests, right? They start pursuing their interests. And if not, if they're not encouraged and they're held back, no, they, it causes them to feel very guilty, and they wouldn't learn much from anywhere. At this particular time, all members of your family is where you learn from. So your grandma, your grandpa, your uncle, your aunt, your mom, your dad, even your siblings is where you learn from. Okay, we move on to the fourth type of phase, or the fourth stage of the development. It is not there in the textbook, Ritika. It's okay, you don't have to scroll down. It is the industry versus the inferiority phase. It is during the school age, that is your 5 to 12 years of age, your what do you call it, the concrete operational phase. Okay, during this time, no, the child is still discovering their own interests and trying to realize that they're okay to be different from others. They're okay, that you know, that they're okay to show that they're different from others. They're trying to show that they're doing what they can and what they're doing is right. Okay, they start doubting their success. Okay, if they can make it in the world, they want to know if they can make it in the world. At this point of time, appreciation from people like their teachers and friends and their peers makes a very huge difference to them. If they're appreciated for all the hard work that they do, they become more industrious. The other word for industrious is again hardworking. But too much negative feedback, if they're constantly being screamed at, if they're constantly being punished for no whatever they do, then they lose motivation and they feel very inferior, thinking that no, I am not doing what is right. This is not the way of life. Okay, and then they'll get very depressed even at this point of time. Neighbors, schools influence the children at this time the most. We move on to the identity versus role confusion. So this is the fifth stage of life. This is where you're in the adolescent phase, the age of 13 to 19. Okay, we learn that we are different, we have different social roles. What are social roles? Social roles is every word that you use to describe yourself: a student, a friend, a child, sorry, someone's kid, someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's a friend. Oh, sorry, friend I've already mentioned. Someone's okay, you're a citizen of this country. All these are different roles that you play in the society. Parents who allow children at this point of time to explore as an individual generally have a very high self, they have their own identity. At this point of time, this individual can find their own identity. But in case the parents are forcing the child to conform to their own thoughts and views, then you see a lot of confusion in this person as to what am I? Am I this? Am I that? They're very confused in their own role. Okay, and this point of time, your role models and peers are your best way of learning anything. We will come across this again in the little later. This is the intimacy versus isolation period. This is during your early 20s to your 40, till you're 40. That is your entire early adulthood. Okay, at this point, we're slowly coming out of your adolescent phase and you're starting to understand who you are. You're slowly understanding that you're this person. Your personality has started to develop on a whole, right? And the things around you change, and you change things about yourself to fit into certain situations. So you're fitting in, like you take up your career, right? So what you do is they have a job description that is basically like a vessel, right? Or a glass. You're like the water that is supposed to fit into it. So you change yourself and the things in you to fit into that glass so that you get absorbed into the industry and all that. Doubt one doubts if they have the ability to find love and to commit. If the person is able to commit during this point of time, they're very confident and happy. If they're able to find form long lasting relationships, they're very confident and happy. In case these people feel that no, they do not have the ability to find love, or they do not have the ability to commit, they're always in isolation and they're very, very lonely. Now, your partners that you have and your friends, they're central to this point of development. Next, we move on to the time of life. That is one of the most important phases, because the age of 40 to 65, that is adulthood, no, is where your generativity and stagnation happens. Generativity versus stagnation. Ritika, I haven't finished contextual theory yet. Again, we will be coming back to this particular topic a little ahead in the chapter. By the age of 40, there's an increase in your creativity and in the service that you do to society. Your interest towards philanthropy is increased during this age. Uh, you tend to lead future generations, and when you do so, you're happy and you're content in life. If you're unable to resolve whatever past that you have, if you have issues of the past and they're unresolved, a person tends to become very pessimistic and stagnant. Home and work environment have a very major influence around this particular time. The last of Erik Erikson's theory, the stages, 8 stages of life theory, is your ego, integrity, and despair. We've already gone through this. It is the time when you're reflecting on your life. It is when this is during the time of 65 to your till the person dies. You reflect on your life. If you're satisfied with your life, then you're content and you have integrity. Now, what is integrity? We've come across this word at least twice till now. Integrity is a state of being whole. It is the state of being honest and having strong moral principles. In case the person is unsatisfied or they haven't found a purpose in life, or they're very upset about their entire life, they tend to be very bitter and they have a lot of despair. This is where they compare themselves with mankind. Have I done this to be a good person? Have I done this to be a good person? Right. Now we move on to contextual approach. I have done the Erik Erikson's 8 stages of life development, because we keep coming across his different life stages over and over again in this chapter. Now, in the contextual approach or the contextual theories of development, this particular approach takes careful account of how many differences that exist in one's life and situations. Context and situations of each individual are different, which accounts for the variation in experiences of the crises. Suppose my experience as a childhood could be that I was bullying someone. My experience through the crises will be a different way. Suppose, for example, me itself, if I was bullied itself, these are all examples. If I was bullied in school, my experiences of these crises will be in a different way, right? Because again, we have different things here which point out towards how the person's life is going to be, right? Context or environment in which they grow is more important than the inbuilt mechanism itself. So no matter how your nature versus nurture theory, this again comes back to your nature versus nurture theory, right? So if your internal genetics say that you're amazing at math, but your context or your environment, your teacher is teaches you horribly in math, then you're not going to be good at math, no matter how much help you get otherwise. Your teacher is where you learn from, right? If she doesn't teach you properly, you won't be able to learn it. This is again an example, right? Theorists believe that children's development is influenced by their exposure to the environment. If you see a child who is exposed to good things tends to be a very good person later on in life. A person who's been experiencing a lot of abuse or all the wrong things in childhood tend to be people who are not really good later on in life. Yuri Bronfenbrenner and Lev Vygotsky are the most important theorists of the contextual theory approach. Bronfenbrenner's theory suggests that development is influenced by experiences arising from a broader social and cultural system, as well as a child's immediate surroundings. Right. So whichever culture you grow up in is what determines your personality in the end, right? Wherever you're growing, whatever is happening around you has a very huge influence on you. The theory focuses on changing relations between individual and environment in which they live in. It talks about the different ways that you interact with your environment and the environment interacts with you. He says that there are five systems in his ecological theory. His ecological theory has five different systems that we are to know. They are the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the explanations for this because I was short of time. Sorry, I'll get back to you on that. Psychosocial changes during early adulthood. Ritika, you can move on to the next part of the chapter. Yes. Now, during your early adulthood, that is your age from 20 to 40, you're very vibrant, you're very active, you're very healthy, you're focused on finding friendships, relationships, you're focused on romance, childbearing, and your career, right? Difficult stages. This is one of the most difficult stages next to adolescence, only because you're preparing for your future. Here, a new sense of independence and a feeling of freedom is what you're going to experience. And talking about independence and a feeling of freedom, I remember a quote from Spider-Man by Uncle Ben, I'm guessing. With great power comes great responsibilities. So even with your independence and even with the freedom that you're going to feel during this particular time, you have a lot of responsibility that you have to take up, right? Anybody sleeping? Anybody has any doubts so far?
No, you can continue. Good.
Okay, thank you. Now, again, we come back to Erik Erikson's theory. This theory was developed through wide ranging experience in psychotherapy. So this was not done just like that. No, this theory wasn't just formed out of the blue. There was a huge amount of work that was put into it by psychotherapy or during psychotherapy with the help of psychotherapy, including extensive experience with uh, children and adolescents from low as well as upper and middle class social classes. Each stage, that is, each of the 8 stages, are known as your psychosocial crisis. And one must resolve the crisis so that they can satisfactorily negotiate through the next one. Satisfactory learning and resolution of each crisis is necessary if the child has to manage through the next or the subsequent crisis satisfactorily. Now we come across another person called Levinson's theory of life, seasons of life theory. Before that, we again we just a second. Yeah, we again come back to the intimacy and isolation thing, right? As I previously described, a person who is able to form your bonds with other people, if they're able to understand what they are, if they're able to find love and all that, they're very confident and happy. If they're not able to form a commitment, or they're not able to find love, then they're socially isolated and very lonely. This is what it says. As I said, all these 8 stages of life keep recurring over and over again throughout the entire chapter. We move on to Levinson's season of life theory. He believed that there were 3 stages of life. Sorry, there were stages with tasks inherent to each one, and was of the view that each stage began with a transition lasting about 5 years. So, what he meant was our life is again divided into stages, and each stage would transition from one to another. And this duration of transition was about 5 years of life, right? The entire shelf life of this transition would be 5 years. Now, the first point of this was life structure. underlying design of a person's life involving relationships with significant others and occupations. That means this particular life structure is about the way a person's life is made, or how he structures his own life, harmonizing the inner and outer demands to enhance the quality of life. In order to increase the quality of of the individual's life, what the individual must do is to be able to find a balance between your inner, that is your psychological and your emotional and your mental demands, as well as your physical and psychosocial, your physiological demands as well. This this is a time where a person is going through intense satisfaction, that is, be it in love, sexuality, family, occupation, setting up life goals. He's very satisfied with whatever he's doing. Dreams and mentors. During this early adult transition, a person constructs a dream and he imagines himself as to how he wants to be in this adult life. And whatever he chooses to be or whatever he chooses to do eventually guides the way he's doing his decision making. In early adult transition, that is the period between 17 to 22 years, the individual is exiting out of the adolescent phase, and he's beginning to make choices of his own, and which is going to shape his adulthood, right? The image of self is established during the time period guiding future decision making. As I said, whatever he wants to be or whatever he wants to do is going to influence the way he's going to make decisions, and that is what he want when that is what he's going to be, right? When an individual dream or when an individual's dream is more specific, he is more motivated to achieve it. So if I want to be a chef, my decisions are going to be that I'm going to take up an internship in Leela. I'm going to take an internship at Four Seasons. I'm going to work with this person. I'm going to work with that person. I'm going to be this way. This is the discipline the chef needs. This is the school that I need to attend in order to be a proper chef. These are all decisions that I'm going to make in order to reach my destination. And because my dream is more specific, I want to be a pastry chef. I'm going to work in a bakery. I'm going to be motivated to look up recipes. I'm going to be motivated to try every sweet that is, dessert that is going to be there on the planet, because a pastry chef needs to know everything. So is more my motivation is to achieve that particular dream of mine, as it is more specific, right? Demands are more individualistic and business and career centered. That means a person at this point of time, all his dreams are going to be about his career, about his future, about his business, about his career and all. This again, Levinson's seasons of life theory, no, it was done during 1920s and 1940s. So all the feminists out here, it is going to be a little offensive to read through the entire thing, but it was what it was during that age. As of now, the definitions have changed. So here, according to what Levinson states, that during this period, that is 1920, when he included the research, when he was doing his research and everything for this particular theory, he realized that all the dreams of being individualistic and being business or career centered were only for men. This is what men wanted all the time at this point of time. But now it also includes women, right? Women are also individualistic, business, and career centered. By the age of 30, that is the age 30 transition. Again, before we move on, when you're talking about dreams and all that, no, for a woman in the age, in the period of 1920 and 1940, their main aim or main dream was to settle down with a proper man, childbearing, future of their family, taking care of their men, taking care of their family. This is what they dreamed of, but not at this point of time. In 2021, that is 100 years from then, we've changed. We have also become career centered and dream centered, business centered. Age 30 transition, it is a time it is during this point of time when the person reevaluates their life structure, and a single person is going to start looking for their partner. Like a person who is single is going to start looking for their partner. Then a real crisis there's a real crisis if neither relationship nor occupation or career is successful. So even if they do not find a partner, or if their jobs are not satisfying enough, or they're not successful in their jobs, they're going to go through a crisis, right? Settling down for men. Now, after the age 30 transition, during the period of age 30 transition, a person is again looking for a job and a life partner, right? So, sorry. So, what does a man want when he's settling down? He's going to focus on what is important in his life, right? Important relationships are focused on, his aspirations are focused on. He's focused on settling down. He's focused on establishing a niche in the society that he's living with. With their, he wants to find a group of people where their values, their families, their power, and their achievements are all similar, right? All have the same mentality. That is what they want. And this period of settling down for women is of continued instability, right? Till they reach their midlife, no, a woman usually tended to be a little unstable emotionally. Unlike men, women did not or do not find their stability until they reach middle adulthood. Their focus then, at this point of time, that is middle adulthood, changes from childbearing and family responsibilities to things like career and other stuff. Social clock, again, for a man who's going as per the expectations of social standards, no, their age graded expectations that are held for life events such as your first job, your marriage, children, buying a house, retirement. Everything has a set order in which a man generally follows. Again, women go through three different clocks at this point of time. The first social clock is following the feminine clock, that is marriage and childbearing within the age of around the age of 20s. So your 20 to 30s is where your feminine clock works at this point of time. Again, this was during the time of 1920s, so things have changed so far. So a person who's following the feminine clock are considered to be responsible, self-controlled, tolerant, and caring. But whatever said and done, while getting married around the age of 20 and giving birth before the age of 30 has its own tolls, right? They have a price that is paid. There's a drop in their self-esteem. Their vulnerability increases with age. A woman, again, who does not follow this feminine clock and follows a more masculine clock, they're they show a very early career development, and they start becoming more dominant, sociable, independent, and intellectually effective. And there's another category where the women do not follow any social clock, and these kind of women generally suffer from self-doubt, feelings of incompetence, and loneliness. Apart from this, we also form close relations, right? We try to find a partner, we start making emotional bonds, we start finding friends, we learn how to engage in intimacy with others. Intimacy here is about talking about your personal stuff, right? Romantic love. Romantic love entails finding a partner to share one's life and dreams with. It enhances the self concept and well being. One's description and evaluation of oneself include psychological and physical characteristics, qualities, skills, roles, and so forth. Self concept contributes to the individual's sense of identity over time. So, the minute he finds the perfect partner or she finds the perfect partner, their self concept also takes a boost, right? They're very confident about themselves because they've gotten what they want. Selecting a mate, finding someone of a similar background, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and religion This is usually done in places where people come to meet each other, congregate in the sense meet each other. A physical proximity generally develops a meaningful relationship. Here, physical proximity talks about your physical aspect of your relationship. Components of love. We've come through this. We've already done this in our previous. Where was this? In our practicals thing, no? Their intimacy, passion, and commitment. The triangle or the Sternberg triangle theory of love. We move on to the attachment and patterns and romantic relationships. Attachment patterns in romantic relationships. Here, this is again very important because most of us will have to go through this and will go through this. Patterns in early attachment can help predict the quality of later intimate relationships. What this means here is if you're very close to your partner from the beginning onwards, if you're very understanding from the beginning onwards, your entire relationship will be stable for most of it, right? But if your initial attachment to your partner is very rocky, and it is very what do you say very as I said, rocky, where you're always fighting with your partner and all that, your entire relationship is going to develop like that itself. It's going to be full of fights. They set up an internal, they in the sense an individual sets up an internal working model or expectations about love and relates to quality of parenting and attachment formed in the relationship. There are three types of attachment we're going to talk about today. That is if secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and your resistance attachment. Your secure attachment is where your relationship is built on trust and happiness. Friendships and partners who are very trusting of each other are the ones who come under this category. The relationships during the secure attachment are very open, likable, comfortable, intimate, and there is no fear of abandonment. Partners turn to each other for comfort and they describe satisfying sexual behaviors. Okay, avoidant attachment. People with this history, that is when their parents are like this, or they've come from a very rough background, have okay, these people have, if they've had very demanding, disrespectful, or critical parents, these people tend to be independent and very mistrusting of their partners. They're very anxious when people get too close, right? These are the people who want a relationship, but when these people are seeing another person's getting too close to them and they're trying to break down the walls that they've built, they tend to push them away or get rid of them, even though those people were actually right for them. Relationships are characterized by jealousy, emotional distance, little enjoyment of physical contact. These people generally tend to be very workaholic and they try to disconnect from the world around them. They try to, they try to attach themselves in flings, or things like one night stands and all that to prove very predominantly that love does not exist. There's nothing such as true love. These are those people who know, they'll be like, oh, the true love doesn't exist. They just didn't experience it so far because of their background. Now, resistance attachment. Resistant attachment is where people have parents who are unpredictable and unfair. Now, I do not know how to give an example to that. Okay. Okay, fine. These relationships, these attachments are characterized by things like fear of abandonment and smothering of their partners. If you look at a narcissistic person, they're actually very afraid of this abandonment, and that is why they try to form a relationship with themselves. They're like, okay, I'm the best, there's no one beyond me, and types like that. Okay, experience extreme highs and lows in a relationship. Again, a person who's not really confident in what they are, or their relationship, no, they generally tend to have a lot of fights amongst each other. They tend to have a lot of ups and downs in their relationships. and poor boundaries with other people, disclosing inappropriately to other people. These people with unpredictable and unfair parents tend to do this. No, they have very poor boundaries with other people. They tend to tell stuff inappropriately to another person a little too early in the relationships. Things that not are not to be told are told way a little more early in the relationship. In eventually or sorry, internally this person is very insecure. Okay. Internally secure partners, that means if your partner is very secure about themselves, generally tend to create a very safe environment for their partners. So even if I'm very secure with myself, if I'm very confident with myself, if I know how to behave, and if I'm very as I said, secure, I'm able to create a safety net for my partner, so that even if they're not able to be this secure with themselves, they'll slowly tend to change with my company. This is again an example. If I am not that secure, for example, if I'm not that secure, if I'm always, self-doubting and all that, even if I have a very secure partner, or suppose say I do not have such a secure partner, the relationship tends to fail. So security induces security in another person. If you're not secure and your partner is not secure, the relationship will not work out. Other attachments that you have during your entire life are friendship. Now, happiness between people of similar background, age, and interests and needs is where your friend. If you see, most of your friendships are generally formed among people with similar background, age, and interests, and all that. I'm so sorry, Ritika, did you stop sharing?
No, I can't see it.
I can't see it. Maybe it's my
Okay,
issue. Wait,
then. Is it visible?
yeah, now it's visible.
All right.
Sorry, I had to mute myself for a minute. Okay. Friendships are generally formed between people of similar background, age, interests, and needs, right? However, I will take this opportunity to show that our friendship that we have among the group, that is all the people who are attending the class right now, or we are constantly contributing when it comes to our study group, not exactly contributing only for studies. All of us are from different backgrounds, different ages, and different needs. But our interest is the same, and hence we've become friends, right? So, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Going back to the subject, this friendship that is very strong offers affirmation, acceptance, being through thick and thin. And it is the proper definition of the saying that is a friend in need is a friend indeed. Again, friendships are of different kinds, no? Same sex relationships, other sex relationships, women relationships. These are relationships that generally tend to be survive a lot longer. These are where women and women talk a lot, right? So if I have for example, Ritika mentions this, right? Ritu and me, we talk a lot. I don't see her today here. Is she here? No, she isn't. Yeah, unfortunately, missing her today. But yeah, we talk a lot, right? A woman sitting with a woman talks a lot. A man sitting with a man generally is more competitive in nature, and that is their basis for their relationship. The competition is what keeps them together. If there is nothing that is challenging them amongst their friendship, they generally tend to leave it. Other sex relationships. Here it is man and woman relationships. No, men generally reveal a lot more when they're around a woman. So they touch their feminine side when they're in a friendship with a woman. And women tend to learn a lot from a male friend, that is especially male motivations and taking things in a very objective manner, right? And again, the third and the last type of friendship is trying to see friendship amongst siblings. Again, Ritu, I think the thing stopped sharing. I can't see the screen. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, sibling friends. Sibling friends are when you're friends with your brother and sister. These, if anybody has, oh, sorry, all those who have siblings, can you give me a shout out? Because you guys actually have an amazing life when it comes to having siblings.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely yes.
Yes, all those who agree, I yeah, shout out. Prahas. Okay. Anyways, so all those who have siblings will realize that you are friends from childhood, right? You have a friend for life. I cannot say from experience because I'm an only child, but I'm really jealous of these siblings or the people who have siblings because they generally tend to share everything with their siblings. They fight, yes, definitely, but who doesn't fight with each other? And these people, these siblings are your best friends. They're your companions for life. They're your best company. And all those who have siblings will agree that no matter what happens in the past, your problems of the past and your problems in the current cannot phase you out when you're with your sibling, right? Especially sisters. When there are two sisters, no matter how much fighting they've done in the past, they're always going to be best friends. Problems from the past subside by adulthood, and sibling relationships predict mental health. When you have good relationships, okay. Praharsh, when you're talking about your sister being the problem, I really doubt it. Anyways,
Sometimes they are problems when around, yeah.
but trust me, when you reach your mid adulthood, it is kind of like, you develop a very much more healthier relationship. Your fights all tend to subside.
Because you would already have your life partner with you. Why would you spend more time with your sibling?
In some way or the other, it tends to happen that way because I've seen my dad's sisters, right? My dad has two sisters, and both of them are very, very close. My dad has a brother, but their communication is very off.
But they can be good partners in crime, yeah.
Yes, I do agree. And I can't tell it to you on a personal experience. It is just what I've seen from others' families. I'm a single child.
For example, my brother just entered the meeting that day and he just changed names and entertained all of you.
Yeah, see, all these are fun memories, are very fond memories. But later on in life, when he is also all grown up, when you're all 30s and no, not 30s, and you're 40 plus, no, you'll look back on this day and you'll be like, oh, that was such a fun experience. I'm pretty sure of this. You try talking to your siblings, all those above the age of 40. Trust me, and try talking to your siblings, at least about your childhood experiences and all the fun things that you've done with each other, or the naughty things that you've done with each other, and you'll have
No, it just ends in blaming each other and fighting. I've tried it. It just ends in blaming and fighting.
Talking about
Anyway, I have not reached that middle adulthood.
Exactly.
So it's
You've not
okay.
reached the middle adulthood. You're still in your early adulthood, and you
Not
just
even
stepped out
that.
of your.
According
Just-
to the lessons, I am still a teenager. Sorry,
Exactly. You're still an adolescent.
Adolescent.
Yeah. Again, Soundarya, you're still an adolescent, and I would suggest you to wait till you're 40 and your brother is also 40. Okay.
Cool.
And then sit and talk about all the stuff that you've done as children. You'll actually have fun. It'll be a good exercise for all of you people. You people will actually have a lot of fun. Trust me on this. We move on to the family's life cycle. Now, coming back to our studies and ignoring our siblings for a little while. I can't read the comments right now, anyways. So, what is family life cycle? It is a sequence of phases and the development of most families. It is a time, there are again phases in your life, right? So, the first phase that you go through is leaving your house. That it can be either for school, college, job, military. You leave at different ages. Okay, there's an increase of chaos at home. Before this process, no, before the process of leaving home, there's an increase of chaos in your house because your parents are not ready to let go of you. Now, joining families. After you leave your house, you join your family after marriage, right? You come back to your family after marriage. Without proper communication, again, in a family, in a marriage, without proper communication and negotiation skills, the openness of marriage is compromised. Okay. Again, there are two types of marriages that you can see: a traditional marriage and an egalitarian marriage. A traditional marriage is where the woman takes care of the home. It is about setting up the home. It is about bearing children. It is about taking care of the husband. It is all dedicated towards the fulfillment of wishes of the husband. Majorly. It is about taking care, satisfactorily taking care of your family, your in-laws, your children, and everything. In an egalitarian marriage, right, it is where the husband and the wife or the spouse, I can't call it husband and wife now anymore. We are in a very open society where your spouses are the best words that can describe this thing. It is where the spouses share the responsibilities of family, right? Half, most of the work that is of the house is split amongst the partners in order to get the work done. Marital satisfaction. Generally, again, when you're talking about marriage, no, it is said, scientifically seen, or it has been studied that men are relatively more happier than women in a marriage. All those who agree, please shout out. All those married people, boo boo.
What do you want
Prahash,
to
we're talking
shout
about
out?
your-
Married life is good, huh?
No, I'm talking about all those who agree to the fact that men are more happier in a marriage than women.
Women are more happier in a marriage life.
Okay, because our textbook says the other way around. Anyways. Yeah, thank you, Julie. Okay.
Continue.
See,
You are not married. You should not continue talking on this topic now. It will go to the debate.
I have a
Okay.
different theory here, but anyway, go on.
We can do this after a recording stopped. Anyways, moving on. The reason why it is said that men are more happier than women is because a man generally takes care of only the earning part and the giving it to the family part, taking care of the family when it comes to food and all that. But a woman, she has multiple roles that that she has to take care of. So she's little annoyed. She's a little more unsatisfied when it comes, right? At this point of time, she's also shifted from her parents' house to her husband's house, which means leaving behind her entire family, her entire, I'm not a feminist teacher, Prash. I'm an equalitarian. I believe in equalism. Anyways, yeah, coming back, the woman is taking care of multiple roles. She's moved away from her family. She's not, she doesn't know anything. She's a little confused. All these give rise to the title that they gave, right? Men are relatively more happier. We move on to parenthood. Parenthood is the most active part of life, right? Active choice that a person takes. Anyways, okay, birth control is available and effective these days. There is less stigmation for couples who remain childless. That means people who do remain childless, who think that they do not want a child, they're not really forced these days. I mean, people are more open towards that. The decision towards having a child has many reasons, right? People should be financially stable. They should have the religious values are taken into consideration. The health concerns also major thing, right? The mother and the father should be very healthy, because if they're not healthy, then the child also might not be healthy. Okay. Next we move on to the advantages of having children is that the person is very warm, like they have a lot of warmth and affection towards the people, other people as well. And those with high status, okay, those people with higher statuses, like if they, when those people who are very, career centric and all that, are the people who generally choose not to have children. Right. Disadvantage of having a child is loss of freedom, burdens. The child is a financial burden. It brings us down. Transition to parenthood occurs in all areas. That is, all those who have children know what I'm talking about because I'm reading from the textbook, not of own experience. Loss of sleep, new tasks, responsibilities, less time for your spouse, increases expenses. The role becomes more traditional, even for an egalitarian couple. So, this can impose frustration on the couple. Loving, supportive marriages can usually manage the strain and will describe themselves as happy. Trouble marriages seem to become even more distressed after a baby. Husband's negativity or out of control conflict predicts a drop in mother's satisfaction. The great difference in caregiving responsibilities, the greater the decline in marital satisfaction after childbirth. Interventions such as group experiences with other couples can get fathers more involved and and enhance the father's appreciation of what caregivers entail or caregiving entails, increases affirmation of the mother and satisfaction. So basically, whatever it says is when the husband is a little more involved in the process, he generally appreciates what the wife does. He's happy when he is a little more, giving, right? Development. Career development aids in establishing a satisfying identity. As adults with satisfying work, develop skills, sense their accomplishments, make friends, and feel more financially independent and secure. It means that a person who is able to handle a career or keep a career generally is more happier in life, right? Establishing a career, men enter their career earlier, and that too as soon as they finish school, and they stay in the marketplace continuously. That means they're in the field of working for a longer period of time. Promotions often seem to depend on job commitment and the competitiveness of work. So you know how the promotions work. Very successful men emphasize on their jobs more than their families or the family responsibilities and leisure activities. These people who are more successful, people like Ambani and all that, I'm pretty sure that they've put their jobs over their family at least for a little time. Also, a sense of self-efficacy makes a difference in promotion. Those people with fears of failure tend to set a lower goal for themselves. Combining work and family, dual career and marriage are challenging. That is a person who is handling both marriage and work, especially for women who carry many role responsibilities or role overload. This links to stress, poor marital relationships, poor parenting, and child behavior problems. It is particularly a problem for people in poorer paying jobs with fewer options for childcare, time, etc. So, if it is seen that women are more stressed when it comes to handling job as well as family, because they have, again, handling a family alone has many roles in it, right? A mother, a wife, a daughter-in-law, all these. But apart from that, there's an extra load on them when it comes to their work as well. Career decisions are more flexible for professional people, but moves are difficult since both careers must be considered. Women are particularly afflicted with the overload. Again, it says that the women are the ones who are more stressed out when it comes to working and all that. Next, we move on to the psychosocial changes during middle adulthood. Again, we come back to Erik Erikson's theory, right? It states that middle adulthood is the period between 45 to 65 years old, and it is to develop, and this time is used to develop generativity or the desire to expand one's influence and commitment towards the family, the society, and the future generations. As we've already mentioned, the generativity versus stagnation in his particular. Yeah, Julie, we'll come back to that later. Okay. So
I suggest we should discuss that. It's a very important touch point when it comes to marriage and development.
Yes, I do. But see, that is a
Yeah,
more general topic. We can come back to it after our session is over.
Sure.
It is an important topic, though.
Yeah. It was just a
Yeah.
thought that I just shared. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, generativity versus stagnation is one of the important phases of Erikson's 8th stage of life theory, where generativity talks about creativity, your period of creativity and all that, right? It is where your person, your midlife person, generally foregoes his more career-centered, self-centered feelings and tries to give back to the society and all that. Okay. Failure of generativity experiences stagnation or self-absorption with its associated self-indulgence and invalidism. That means a person who is not able to be generative, that is, give back to the society, he still has unresolved issues from the past. He's feeling stagnated. He doesn't know where to go. These are all phases that you'll find in this, these are all the different things that you find during 45 to 65. They're still reflecting back to life and trying to find the meaning and purpose of life, right? Because they realize that their youth is over, and they have lesser life in front of them than what they had behind them. And these people are trying to find what to do in order to feel liberated, feel free, feel happy, feel satisfied. So if a person is not able to find any of this, they are generally self-indulgent and they're very invalid. They feel very invalid. Levinson's Seasons of Life theory, again, it talks about the midlife transition, that is around the age of 40, when people evaluate their success in meeting their adult goals, and this is a period of reevaluation. The 4 developmental tasks in middle adulthood. Now, when you're in middle adulthood, there are 4 things that you do. That is, you move away from being young, right? You're no longer young. So you want to try to find ways in order to feel young again. Old people give up on some qualities that no longer seem appropriate and transforming others, finding positive meaning in changes. So people who are in this particular age period, generally give up things like, partying too much or something in order to fit into the age criteria, right? They make certain changes in order to have a more healthier life. Destruction and creativity, the evaluation of the past and attempt at conciliation and apologize. They start making amends and being more creative. So at this point of time, they're destroying whatever past bad things they've done. So they're reevaluating their past. They're trying to destroy all the stuff that is bad in them, and they're trying to make amends with people that they've fought. Suppose, say, the siblings in a family have fought. They had a very big fight during their early adulthood. Say, suppose when they're in their early 20s or something, they had really, really huge fight. They stopped talking to each other and all that. But by the age of 45, they're trying to destroy whatever wrong that has happened between them. And they're trying to make amends with their parents, with their siblings, and all that in order to get close to each other. Masculinity and femininity. Now, in the middle age, men generally tend to be in touch with their feminine side. Every human is made up of a masculine side and a feminine side, right? They have both qualities in them. So a man generally does not want to accept the feminine side till he is in his late 40s, sorry, mid 40s or late 40s, because he's considered weak apart, if not, right? So at this point of time, the man generally tries to be in touch with his emotions and all that. Middle-aged people must find a way to recognize and integrate their masculine and feminine aspects of their personality. So again, as I said, a man or a woman at this point of time generally tend to be in touch with their opposite side, right? So a man generally is in touch with his feminine side, and a woman is in general in touch with their masculine side. Engagement and separateness. People during this age aim at finding a balance. Men withdraw from their work and ambitions, and women generally move towards their work and career. Meaning, a man at this point of time has again tried to change careers because he's not satisfied, right? He's no longer wanting to be the CEO because he doesn't find satisfaction in the job. He walks towards his family. He's trying to spend more time with his family, friends, and all that in order to find satisfaction. A woman generally is at this point of time has given birth to the children. They're at a certain age that they can take care of themselves even if she's not there. So she starts thinking about going back into their career and all that. Okay, looks like I have taken a little too long to finish this chapter. Okay, should I continue or can we do it another day? Shall we do it another day?
Okay, let's stop it. Yeah, it's already time, please. Please.
It's
How
already
much is
10
left
here.
out?
We are still at 5. There's 6. That means there's one more unit. We're still at the beginning of 5.
It's too much for today, Vasu.
Okay, if this is a very
We are
big
retired hurt.
Big
What?
event.
you can
Just
stop
stop
recording, I
recording.
guess.
Oh, yeah, sorry.